Okay, so one of the questions that you might have in thinking about booking an international trip is how do you even get started on booking the flights, on even comparing them? So a lot of people have a preferred airline or a travel site that they would use to look for flights or compare flights domestically. For example, my parents will swear by Southwest. I haven't had the best luck using Southwest domestically, but or maybe some people really like Expedia or Hotwire. My preferred way of getting started to look and compare the options for an international flight is actually Google Flights. So I'm going to go there now so you can see. Okay, so my husband and I are actually planning a trip to Brazil for next year. We're hoping to go around February. I have never been in Brazil for Carnival. I've been there about maybe 5 or 6 times now, but never during Carnival. So I really would like to go. So I love Google Flights because when you go to input the date, you don't have to just pick a random day that occurs in your mind and see the flight, and if it's too expensive, try the next day and the next day. You can pull up this calendar and it gives you the price for every single day in the next year. And then it also highlights the cheapest flights in green. So I don't know if you can see that, but here we have in September and October, this cheap flight is $835, whereas some of the other ones, $14.18, $9.49. It's highlighted the cheapest ones for me. So if I am flexible with my dates, if I don't have to leave on a very specific date and come back on a specific date, it already is recommending to me what could potentially be the cheapest flight. So I'm going to go ahead and advance this to February of next year. So Carnival takes place, or at least it starts in São Paulo on the 21st, this Friday here. So I could leave on the 12th or the 14th to get this extra cheap flight. So let's say I'm going to leave on the 14th. If I were to stay a full 2 weeks, I would come back on this Friday the 28th, and you can see that the price is $11.49. But if I could extend it out to Monday, which I'm sure that we can, it's the $8.35 cheap price. So then I'm going to go ahead and click done. I have my dates locked in. And as you can see, it brought up all of the different flights. We have Copa Airlines, we have Air Canada, we have American, we have United. And it also here brings up what it thinks is the best flight, either by price or by total travel time or by the layover. You can scroll down and they give you a lot of other options. There's 67 other options that you can look for here, but it's telling you that they're more expensive or longer flights. So I probably don't want to take a look at those. So I'm going to come back up. This top option is the one that is $8.35. So I can see here we have a departure time of 10:16 p.m. That's from Denver. It's not in the middle of the night, so that's pretty good. There is one connection over here in Panama City, and it's 5 hours and 46 minutes. So one connection, that's pretty good. I only have to take 2 flights. 5 hours and 46 minutes of a connection. It's a little bit long, but not as bad as this one here. That's 8 hours and 13 minutes. And the other thing that you want to look for when you're booking your international trip is the length of the layover. So this one has a 45-minute stop, and I think that's Washington DC, but I could be correct, or I could be wrong on that. If you don't give yourself enough time, you could be sprinting through the airport. If there's any sort of delay, you'll definitely miss your flight. So as a general rule for an international trip, I would say between 2 to 3 hours is the perfect layover. But for this one, you know, this is close to 2 hours. That's 1,700 and this one's 800. So I'm gonna go with this one. Another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this is this time, the arrival time is in the local time. So you'll have to factor in time zones. I know just from my own experience that in February, Brazil is 5 hours ahead of Denver. So that would be arriving, you know, 3:45 Denver time. So overall, 18 hours of travel time. Not the best option in here, but also not the worst. So it's a pretty good option. So I'll go ahead and click this. Now I have my return flight. So I can see here for the 8:35, it's also on Copa. It would be leaving at 5:25 a.m. That might be a little bit rough because to get to the airport for 5:25, we may only get 2 or 3 hours of sleep that night. But I like this flight because it's only 14 and a half hours. There's an hour and a half layover. So, you know, that's a little bit. I would like a full 2 hours to have the cushion, but it's not bad, and it still is the 8:35 when the next possible option is 16:21. So this is a good option, I think. Once you select it, it gives you the details, and then it gives you the option to book. It's 8:31 if I book on this, you know, travel site here. If I book on CheapOair, it's 8:35, or I can book directly with the airline itself. So if I were to click here, it would take me directly to Copa's website, and I would be booking directly through their website. The reason why I like that is because if you book on one of these, you know, travel website, that's fine. But if you have any issues, if you miss your flight, if there's a problem with the connection, since you didn't book directly with the airline, you would have to get in contact and call this travel website rather than just working with the airline in the airport. A good example of this was when I was living in Brazil and I had a flight to go to Argentina. I left for the airport 4 hours in advance. That's another thing that I didn't talk about earlier as a general tip. They generally say that you should get to the airport 2 to 3 hours in advance when you have an international trip, just to allow time to check in and get to your gate. But you also want to make sure you're leaving your house with enough time and factoring in any traffic to get to the airport to allow yourself to have that time. This might not be so much of a problem in the US, but when you're abroad and there could be unexpected traffic, if you're not familiar with the traffic patterns, or if you have to take public transportation, there can always be delays. And so in this scenario, I think it's definitely better to play it on the safe side and to leave a little bit earlier rather than to cut it close and risk missing your flight. So in my case, I was in Brazil and I left 4 hours from my house before the flight was supposed to take off. Got in some really bad unexpected traffic, and I got to the airport 45 minutes before my flight was going to take off, at which point the counter for that flight had already closed, and so I couldn't get my tickets, I couldn't check my bag, and I lost my flight. I incurred you know, additional expenses of having to book another flight. It was a total of $700 to rebook the flight for the next day when I originally spent $300 on the original trip. But also, it was just a huge headache because I hadn't booked with the airline, I booked with a travel site. And when I missed my flight, the airline said that they couldn't work with me because the reservation wasn't with them. They had the reservation from the travel site. So I had to call in Brazil some number in London, and I got charged with international minutes on my phone and had to get put on hold for about 45 minutes before someone would talk to me, and then I rebooked, and so the whole thing was just a disaster. I had to spend additional money to get a hotel in Brazil that night. Overall, it was just a complete disaster, and so since then, if I can help it, I try and book directly with the airline instead of going through another company. So if I were to click on select over here, it would take me directly to their website with this specific flight picked out and for this price, and then I can go ahead and just book directly through their website. So one thing to keep in mind with using Google Flights is that not all airlines participate. The majority of them do, and the only one that I can actually think of that I know for a fact doesn't participate is Southwest. And so if you want to go and see compared to these options if Southwest has a better option, I'm not sure if they go abroad a lot. All I know is that Southwest does not come up in Google Flights, and so they won't be considered, and you won't be able to compare unless you go directly to their website. So in summary, I really like to use Google Flights as a starting point. Let's say I decided that I wanted this flight, but I still think that maybe I could get it a little bit cheaper. I could come on this site, 3 or 4 times a week and type in, my dates that I've picked and my destination, and I could monitor it, see if it goes up and down. Another thing that I really like about Google Flights is that you don't have to go and come back on the same airline. So this is really nice, especially internationally, because we only have so many airlines that fly out of the US, but there are a ton of airlines once you get to, let's say, to Europe. There's a ton of really small airlines, you know, around Europe that maybe that main flight from the US to Europe, it would be, you know, one of the airlines that you're familiar with, like United or Delta. But maybe there is a bunch of airlines in Europe or in Asia or Africa or South America that you're not familiar with and that are probably going to have better deals. They will pull up on here, and you can combine one flight with another airline and a separate flight. You can fly there on one airline and come back on another one, and this option down here, it'll take you directly to their website too. So you know, you can book directly with the airlines for all legs of the flight. Another thing that I really like about Google Flights is that it's so easy to change things. So let's say I go back to my calendar and I think, oh, I can't leave on a Friday, I have to work that day, I have something going on. I'm actually going to change it to the 15th and still come back the 2nd. It's that easy to change it, and now all the options are down here again. I do want to point out here, it has given us a little bit of an error. Or not an error, but a warning. It says that there's a 13-hour, 35-minute layover and it's overnight. So it's kind of giving me a heads up that this might not be a great option, even though the price is really cheap. There's a really long layover, which has increased the total travel time here. Okay, so as a second example, I have entered in another place that I would really like to go someday, which is Dubrovnik, which is in Croatia. That was entered in the destination field. I picked summer of next year, just some random dates just to use as an example. So as you can see, it's giving you the best departing flights. These ones don't have too bad of a travel time, and there's only one layover for each of them, but as you can see, they're quite a bit more expensive. So when I come down to these flights, it looks like this is the better deal at $1,500 or $1,600. But as you can see here, all of them have 2 layovers, which means 3 flights total, and some longer travel times here. It's giving me a little bit of a warning that this one has an overnight layover. This one has an 11-hour layover, long layovers, overnight layovers. So none of these really look ideal. I don't think anybody wants to be traveling for 32 hours total. So at this stage, I would need to decide what's more important to me. Would I prefer to pay an extra $800 for a more direct route and a shorter travel time? Or would I prefer to pay less and be on a plane for a longer amount of time? To be honest, personally, I would probably go with this flight here. It does have 2 stops, and it is a little bit more cumbersome having 3 different flights, but the total travel time isn't terrible at 17.5 hours, and it is the cheaper rate. So I can go ahead and click on that. But as I see here, my return trips are not that great. They're all very long. They each have 2 layovers, and if I want a trip back that only has 1 layover, it goes up to $5,000. So this is why I think it's best to play around with Google Flights. Maybe I can decide if my plans aren't set. Maybe June isn't the best month to go. Let me try a couple months earlier and see if we can get a more direct flight for a cheaper amount of money. Here we've got some cheaper flights. So let's try again. I'm going to go here, stay for 2 weeks. Let's see what options we have now. Okay, so the first ones that come up are really not ideal. There's 3 stops, 3 layovers, which means there is 4 total flights. Given the fact that the total travel time is 20 hours, those have got to be pretty short layovers and pretty short flights, so maybe these aren't the best options. Coming down here, yeah, we have a lot of them that are 3 stops. So to be honest, I would probably start looking at these options here. We have a flight for $12.63, which isn't terrible. That's only 15.5 hours, even though it does have 2 layovers. So let me click on this one and see what my options are for return trips. See, now here my options are much better. I can have a layover with 1 stop in France. That's 18 hours, so I'm probably not going to pick that. But this one here, there's 2 stops. It's a total of 16 hours total travel time. time, and it's for the 1281. So just by adjusting the dates a little bit, I was able to find a better deal and a better option for flights. So this is why I think it's important to give yourself enough time. I would say maybe about a month or 2 months before you're ready to actually purchase the trip. Come on here and start playing around. Play around with some dates. Once you find a flight that you're completely sold on, like let's say this was the flight that I absolutely wanted, I'm going to go ahead and monitor it. I'm going to see if I can get this price to come down even more. Maybe on a random weekday, maybe I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody has their, saying of when flights are supposed to be cheaper. So maybe I'll try a couple of different things, see if I can get it to come down. It is a gambling game though, because if you wait too long, it can definitely go up and then you'll have to pay a higher price. So I think it's just important to find the most desirable flight that you think is going to work for your timetables and for your schedule, and then monitor it for a little while, see if you can get it to come down. So Google Flights, as I said, is my preferred website. The other sites that I will use are orbitz.com, kayak.com, and if you are a student, you can book through Student Universe, and there are actually some really good deals on that website too. You'll probably get a discounted trip just for being a student. So I recommend those sites if you do want to try something outside of Google Flights. I used to use Orbitz quite a bit, and then when I discovered Google Flights, I found that Google always had the cheapest flights because it's comparing some of these options down here, the travel sites, directly with what is on the airline site. So it really gets you, most of the time, I've found, the lowest bottom dollar. For the remainder of the video, please click on part 3.